Leigh Bortins Show, and guys, it's on movies. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about movies, and specifically we're going to talk about just ideas on what makes a good Christian movie. A lot of our followers in Classical Conversations are interested in movies for their families. We have some big movie buffs here in the room. I'll introduce them in a minute. And lots of times things that will claim to be Christian movies are like the ones they're most embarrassed to recommend. And so we want to talk about what makes a great Christian movie that you'd be thrilled to tell all your friends to watch. So I have with me tonight Jeremiah Owens.
Yeah.
Husband of Becky. We got Christopher Blackburn, the producer.
Hello.
And we've got Tobin Doobie, husband of Dina Rose, and we couldn't remember the baby's name.
Well, I'm only the husband of one of those people, but
there's the children. What are the two kids' names? Rose and
Clara.
Clara. And my son William's in the room. He's here from King's College, going back to school for this last semester. Mom and Dad are glad. One less tuition to pay. David, get going. Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to talk about movies is Andrew Pudewa and his wife Robin were spending the weekend with my husband Rob and I. And I was suggesting movies that they watch because they don't really watch movies. And Andrew went home and watched them. And he said, Leigh, you are really good at picking out movies. You should do a blog. And I said, Andrew, that's just work. But the sage that you are, I have to listen to you. So we thought we'd do one episode on movies and recommendations for families that are listening. Okay, so I let his kind words go to my head and make me think I might be good at this. So you guys help me out, all right?
All right.
All right.
Okay, so let's first start off with the round table. Say your name and maybe a movie you wish everyone would watch, but don't tell us why yet.
Just one? Just one movie?
Just one right now.
Okay, so my name is Jeremiah, and I'm here to I come in fully prepared to blast all of you because of your recommendations. The one movie that I think everybody should watch, I'm going to go with the Frank Capra classic, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Most people know Frank Capra because of his movie, It's a Wonderful Life. I think Frank Capra came out with some incredible cinema, and I think a lot of filmmakers today could learn a lot from watching the black and white classic.
Okay. And you, Christopher?
I want to just pass on this question. A singular movie that everyone should watch. Well, I'm going to do something.
He didn't do a singular. He can never follow directions. He gave you a whole genre.
I did one, just one movie. That's
You
one.
did.
Mr. Smith
You
Goes
said
to Washington.
Frank
Capra. He's the director. It's one movie. If I had said Lord of the Rings, that would be cheating, right?
Right.
Lord of the Rings, that's
and
a
who would watch
trilogy.
something by Peter Jackson?
Oh, are we getting it already? Oh, my goodness. Chris, what's your
Porn
movie?
King. That's not family movies.
What is happening right now? Chris, tell us your movie.
I'm going to just, because you said that, I'm going to say you should watch Fellowship of the Ring, the first one.
Okay.
The first Fellowship, not the second Fellowship of the Ring.
Well, there were two, Jeremiah.
So not a part one,
Second
part
was
two,
2
but one filmed early and one filmed late? No?
No, there was a theatrical and a director's.
Oh, my, you guys are such snobs. Tobin, your turn.
Oh, boy. Okay, so Tobin Doobie here. One movie. See, I'm torn between the one horror film that every Christian parent needs to see and the one very incomprehensible art film that every person needs to see.
Well, give us two then. Go ahead.
So, Tree of Life is this wonderful art film about what it is to be a kind of the memories that form us, and the entire thing takes place not as a linear narrative, but as the thoughts of a man going about his day at work and knowing that when he gets home from work, he's either going to kick his wife out or leave her, whatever, or he's going to go home and make his marriage work. And you don't realize that initially because nothing is established like a plot. It's his thoughts about the parental forces that shaped him and which parent he's going to act like when he gets home.
I've not seen it. Have you guys?
It's really hard to understand because it's an art film. It's not a narrative movie. It's very beautiful.
What was the other one? You were going to tell us too.
Well, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
But I'll just suffice it to say, I don't think horror films are necessarily a bad thing. And I think that they are. I think it is a genre that Christians ought to be more interested in and more aware of.
I think we can talk about that. I think that's right. Okay, so I'm going to recommend one that I've never heard Christians talk about. It's called Bella,
Oh, yeah.
Bella. and basically about a man who turns his tragedy into a real blessing for another family. Um, and it's just one of those. It's an art film too, beautifully filmed, but and it's family friendly. There's nothing in there to scare even little ones. So that's mine. Is Bella. All right. So we've kind of got kicked off here. So he wants to talk about horror movies. So tell us what you want to say, and I'll tell you why I think we should watch horror movies too.
So, horror is the one genre. Well, it's one genre which strongly does this. It affirms that evil is real, and that our weapons for fighting evil are not of this world. They are things like repentance and faith and virtue. And whether characters actually succeed in defeating the evil or not, I think that's a very fascinating construct in that genre. All of the evils that Stephen King, in particular, has created in his novels and in the films that are adapted from his novels, are not defeated by any kind of earthly weapon or even really any supernatural weapon, like in a magical sense. They are defeated by simple acts of resistance. Evil has no power over you when you refuse to be afraid of it.
That is really interesting. So you're not referring to movies where people are just hacked up.
Right. Well, I don't know if there are any of those that are even well done horror films. But no, I'm not. I think it's a genre that there's room to work in and tell stories about faith and about supernatural battles. And the movie I was going to recommend is called The Babadook, which is an Australian term for a boogeyman. It's an Australian film, and it's the story of this single mother, very troubled, insomniac, all these deep issues really kind of festering inside of her, and the trouble she has raising her very strong-willed, very wild son. And it keeps you guessing whether this is an evil child movie? Is this a haunted house movie where only the child can see the evil? Is this I'm doing things in my sleep I don't remember kind of a movie? It keeps you guessing, but it is at core a story about parents have authority over what goes on in their house. And the scariest monster is your own unacknowledged sin that's lurking inside you.
Okay. I feel like to a point we're putting lipstick on a pig. Can we define terms a little bit?
All
Like,
right.
are we talking about psychological thrillers like Sixth Sense? You kind of meandered into that area, or are we talking about like some of the most popular horror movies of all time, like It and maybe Blair Witch Project and The Exorcist and The Ring and stuff like that? I mean, isn't there a difference between like ones that are just suspenseful movies and ones that are designed? I mean, the definition of a horror movie is one that was supposed to horrify you and make you feel fear, correct?
I think that's I'll go with that definition.
So you're saying that there would be redeeming value for you to recommend everybody should watch, for example, I'm just pulling names out of the air, It.
Possibly. I haven't seen it.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be for every horror movie, right? You're trying to say that there's
Right.
horror movies
Yeah,
made a certain way. that
I'm
we should look
evaluating
at.
it as a genre, not as not even saying what percentage of the things done in that genre are worthwhile.
That just seems like it's reaching to me. I mean, I understand. I come from the opposite perspective. I don't feel like horror movies are for me, but I also, and the reason is because I feel like the Bible says God hasn't given you a spirit of fear. And so for me, I try and avoid things that create that spirit of fear within me. And I know just the way I'm built. If I watch a horror movie like that, then when I go to sleep and I lay in bed, then all of those images keep coming back to me. And I know that you can delve into anything and say, here, this is the redeemable parts of it, and this is the part that corresponds to the gospel, and this, there's nothing redeemable about this movie except it convinces us of our own depravity. Like there are things you can go with any movie and say, okay, we can find some biblical tie-in. Okay, I kind of feel like that's maybe what you're trying to do here. Because I would come from the opposite side. I don't really see redeemable value to a lot of the horror genre. Now, I will say this. I do like what you said about how when you walk into a cinema to watch a horror movie, everybody in the audience is agreeing to believe in the supernatural.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a cool unity to have with audience members that you don't always get, to say, here, we all believe that there is a good and a bad force in the world, and they're fighting against each other. I just think that there are some horror movies that maybe exploit one side of that more than the other. Now, all of that said, let me back up and throw this in there. I do believe that this is probably one of those areas where 1 Corinthians 8 applies, about the freedom of believers and how, if the Holy Spirit convicts one person, it may not be on another person, so who are you to judge? So
Right.
I get that. I just feel like, for me, I would speak from the perspective of people who would be like, I really don't feel like horror movies have a place in my life.
I would respect that on the first, for the same reasons, 1 Corinthians. Just to wrap up, what I'm trying to say is that there are things we should be afraid of, and my own almost a jealousy of my child, of how much harder my life is now. That's a feeling that's there that has to be battled like a monster, and you have to keep it small by defeating it every day. That's what the Babadook is about, and I was blown away that they were able to make a film about that emotion. And there are other films that I think cause you to be afraid of things that are very real forces, but that's not usually people being hacked up, people being taken captive. It's much more of a psychological portrait. I think the best horror at its best is a picture of a person's own thoughts and what it means to be human, what it means to have a sin nature.
So maybe an example families can relate to is in the Lord of the Rings series, when Gollum, pre-Gollum, when the face would change and it was horrific.
Yeah. That's a horror element.
Right, and it was an element of that look, see who's really here.
And the entire film isn't about him, but if
Right.
it were, if he was the main character of a film, that would be a horror film.
What do you think of that, Jeremiah? Christopher, you want to weigh in?
Did you watch horror movies a lot growing up? When did you
No.
start? So when did that happen?
Oh,
Was it like Crypt Creeper when you were
No,
a kid,
like
or
after, well into my adult life.
You could handle that, right? At that time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some of the stuff you wouldn't say little guys should be watching at all.
No, and I don't even think that the things they have to say are the feelings and the vices that they have to talk about are actually relevant to kids.
Right. All right, so I would say Tobin's making the point that if we're talking about Christian movies, they don't necessarily have the word Jesus or Christian in the title. He's trying to open our minds to, is there some other way to look at, what the elements are? Okay, so anything you specifically wanted to talk about, Jeremiah?
No, I'm curious. I mean, because you kind of took it a different direction there. We're talking about what, and let me just come out. This conversation took a big left turn right out the gate, and I was not prepared for this. So that was, we're here to talk about movies and family, and we're a homeschooling company. We go right into horror movies.
Yeah, I kind of dropped.
Not what I was expecting.
I kind of put that setup out there for people to keep listening for the second
Bait
half,
and
and Leigh jumped right on it. So.
Lord of Man, yeah.
Well, so I couldn't even tell you a Christian horror movie with an element in it to recommend to somebody. I don't watch horror movies because I'm pretty sure all those monsters live under my bed. And so I've spent most of my life terrified of those kind of stories. But I do recognize that when I read through scripture, I come across some pretty crazy things. Walking dead people, bones brought back to life, all kinds of just supernatural activity. And when I do see those elements integrated into a movie, I think that is in the Bible. And so that's what I like about it.
Yes, that's true. But in the Bible, it's doing that with the purpose of bringing glory to God and to show that God is sovereign over these things. And I don't feel like that element is always communicated in these movies, right?
You're right.
No, not
I'm
always.
just pointing out that Tobin's saying it could be.
Yeah.
It could be if it was thought
Which
about it.
I think is a stretch.
There are real monsters inside our hearts, and those are things that we should be able to talk about in film, and not how.
Right.
I think as Christian filmmakers in particular, and not have some rule about, that would mean going into this genre that I don't go into.
I think also, having known you for so long, that you are reacting to the idea that so many Christian films are about sentimentality, which is also a sin, and nobody thinks that's a sin. And I think it's just as bad as horror side. So, for example, when you watch a movie where the romance is just so powerful in it that you find yourself wanting these people to commit inappropriate acts because it's so sentimentally strong that that's just as sinful as watching something that's a horrific act and approving of it also.
I think that's true, and I think it also creates false expectations. Like I think movies or the film genre, any type of cinema, let's say, has one of the biggest problems. It creates unrealistic expectations for relationships. I think if you wanted to phrase it this way, maybe you could say maybe one of the biggest relationship killers is princesses and porn, because it creates unrealistic expectations. And so women, they watch these romantic comedies and they see these, the guy who does all these things, which in real life would just be stalking and get a restraining order. But in the movies, they get a pass and they can do it, right?
Yeah.
And they watch these rom-coms and they go, oh, that's incredible. I want a guy like that, and creates unrealistic expectations. And guys, the reverse is true as well. So, I think I come at this from a little bit different perspective. This is why I asked you the question about your horror movies, and when you started watching them. And it's interesting that you didn't start them till later, because I was raised in a fairly conservative home, and we did not watch. We had one TV in the house, and it was in my parents' bedroom, and there was not a lot of TV watching going on. So we were raised on a lot of the old movies, black and white.
We're all nodding because that's all of our situation.
Yeah. You guys nod more audibly next time.
Yeah, we will.
We're nodding.
There you go. Lots of nodding going on. Good. But I never explored the horror genre because even when I was a teenager, and we watched, Jurassic Park was around, we watched a lot of Matrix, those types of movies, but I was just never into the horror movies. That wasn't my scene. And then you said you started watching when you got older. I got out of college. 3 weeks later, I got married, and then I'm looking for a job because I have a family to support, right? And then I have kids, and all of a sudden, I don't have time to explore these types of movies. So it's never really a genre I've explored.
And I will say it is a genre that has changed a lot in recent years in terms of being more psychological.
Yeah. So for me, the question with movies now is, how do I reconcile the fact that I want my kids to be exposed to good art? Because I do appreciate good art, and I think everybody here does. We want our kids to know good literature, good painting, good music when they hear it. And at the same time, like you were saying, Tobin, or Leigh, there's a lot of times that's not found in faith-based mediums.
And this is the conversation that Jeremiah and I keep on starting to have all for the last 2 weeks, because we work very close in the same, almost in the same room. And so we keep on almost having this conversation and realizing we're doing a disservice by having it early. So
now, guys.
Well, here's the thing. I have 4 kids. I want them to grow up knowing, the oldest is almost 12. The youngest is just turned 3. And that's a pretty big range. And I want to introduce them to good art, but at the same time, there are some things that they're just not psychologically ready for yet.
Yeah.
And so how do I be a good steward of that? And that's what I'm trying to wrestle through as a family.
So there's a website. Let me make some recommendations that might help not just you, Jeremiah, but our whole audience. One I came across I liked. Unfortunately, it's not the best looking website. It's called the Educational Guidance Institute, where she's taken all the gal who owns it has taken all the black and white movies and made study guides with them, so that you can have an academic kind of twist to them. But she pulls out politics, religion, culture, geography, so it can help we as parents. With my kids, I would never want to do a study guide with the movie. I'd want to watch the movie. But if you aren't good at talking about culture in movies, the recommendations she has are good. You could read it ahead of time, and then at the end, you could point out maybe 1 or 2 things that you like. Otherwise, your kids won't want to watch movies with you because you've just turned them into a classroom. Yeah. But the Educational Guidance Institute, and then World Magazine is really good at the current reviews, and I would say they're a little more liberal-minded, more like you are, Tobin. I think you would appreciate World Magazine's reviews. That's a Christian weekly. And then for those who are a little more conservative, Plugged In, which is American Family Radio, and then Common Sense Media are 2 really explicit, trying to filter things out that really children and whole families can watch together. So there are a lot of sources available. And over the last 2 months while we've been talking about this, my husband and I have every night watched 2 movies. We've gone back to watch the old black and whites and some early 60s and 70s movies. And there are some fabulous movies for families available out there that are very Christian in their message. And sometimes they don't even say Jesus, right? They're almost more like the Book of Esther, where it's all there, but you don't need to say his name in order to know he's there. So that's my little commercial for my resources.
Good.
All right. So keep on going, guys. Let's talk about sentimentality, because that's one of your concerns you just brought up. What makes sentimental movies not good to watch? Or what makes them when they are a good movie?
Yeah, I just think I don't like things that unrealistically play on create unrealistic expectations, but also things that are an obvious money grab because they play on emotions, and that goes for movies, and that goes for preachers, that goes for anything on any end of the spectrum. I think when people just exploit people's emotions, they play up sob stories. I think the news does this all the time. We see it, so I'm just against that as a whole.
Being manipulated.
Yeah, manipulation. Right. I'm against manipulation.
Because I'd push back some on the whole princess thing. I think sometimes that gets a bad rap. I'm pretty sure I'm a princess and I know exactly what kingdom I belong to. And my Prince Charming is exactly coming, and his name's Jesus Christ. And as I talk to my granddaughter about how when she sees the prince and he's coming, that yes, he is coming. He really and truly is coming. You just have to have the expectations on what the right prince is.
Okay, so that's true, and we have a book of Bible princesses that my daughter reads, and I see that. I think that's good, but I don't think that that's the message that's too often portrayed in media. Like for us, when I talk to my daughter about princesses, I'll tell her, yes, princesses are fun, but who's the best princess? And she'll say Princess Leia. And we'll say, okay, now tell me why. And she says, because she's out on the front lines fighting with her people. She's not up in a castle with servants waiting on her hand and foot. She's out there fighting. That's the princess you want to be.
I agree.
Yeah, that's good.
He's waving his hands in the air again.
Good.
Drum roll. Is that what that is?
Your daughters might like She-Ra, not the new one, but the 80s one.
Robert and John were raised on She-Ra.
I was actually going to bring it up. I mean, you don't talk about good values that are done in a family-friendly way. A lot of Saturday morning cartoons are actually surprisingly good.
They are.
Yeah, we watch a lot of Tom and Jerry at our house. It's universal.
I tried to get my 3-year-old into He-Man, but right next to it on Netflix is She-Ra, and she was kind of the response to He-Man was tepid, but when she saw this yellow-haired princess on a flying unicorn in the next thumbnail.
So let me ask you this, Tobin, and Leigh, growing up, William, it's good to have you here too, because I'd like to hear your perspective on this. But let me set the stage, and then I'll ask the question. When we first had our oldest son, we were in the hospital room, and we had gotten a movie to watch, and my wife and I thought, oh, this will be a fun movie. We can, she's just had the baby. We have nothing else to do. We'll just sit here in the hospital room and watch this movie. And we put it on, and I think it was it The Longest Yard? It was a remake. It had The Rock in it. It was about the prisoners. Okay, right. So we're watching that movie, and one of the guys says, hell. And we looked at each other, and we thought, that's okay. I mean, we never really paid too much attention to it before. Later on, they said the D word. And Becky and I stopped, and we paused it, and we looked at our baby, who was like hours old, and we turned the movie off because all of a sudden, everything was totally different for us.
Yep.
And we would not have given a second thought the day before. But now we had little ears. I mean, he didn't know anything. He's little, he's 11 pounds or whatever.
But you had ears.
But we had ears, yeah. And so all of a sudden, we looked at it from a different perspective. So I guess my question, Leigh and William, I really want to hear your thoughts about this. What are your rules for your family? Now that you have little kids, your job is to protect them and grow them up. How do you navigate those waters with movies?
Some families have to decide if they're going to have any TV or movies at all for a certain period of time, especially with younger children. I know that with our older two, we had a TV at first, and we weren't Christians, and really, we're new to parenting, didn't have really great role models nearby to help. And I one day realized it was devastating our whole family, not just the kids. And so we just got rid of the TV. And so for us, for another 6 years, we had no TV in the house. So it was they were really young when they were watching She-Ra at that point. Versus this next generation with William and David, they had older teenage brothers when they cared about watching. In fact, Robert was in his 20s by the time they were really watching movies. So it was, we didn't even try to police it in some ways. We just knew that they were going to see, what they were going to see. So sometimes your family situation, can make that difference in whether you even watch movies in the first place or not. I don't think any of us here would say you should have no TV or no movies at all, right? We're not.
Right.
But then when is there an age or is there a time when you start bringing them in? And you're experiencing that now with your two littlest.
Yeah, and another big thing for me is violence, and not even like graphic violence, but there's a time when Rose was really little, and Deanna and I were watching a classic Star Trek episode. Like what could be more innocent than the Captain Kirk and going on an adventure, and he gets into some fisticuffs with a man who's on the planet, and Rose perked up and said, "Fall?" When she just seen a man hit another man and make him fall down. And I realized that's not something that should exist. And it takes some context and some maturity to realize that there's a need for violence sometimes, or furthermore to realize that this is a cartoonish thing that actors had fun making, right? And so
But she didn't know that because she's just little.
No, and she could her articulation of her emotion was a single word. And that's how little she was. I forget how old she was, but realized, okay, she's responsive to things. Another thing, we were watching a show that had somebody shouting at somebody else, and Rose was under a year old, and she immediately started crying just at that sound that she'd never heard in our home, but she knew that was an upsetting, unnatural sound. So I do think people need to think harder about violence than just to say, we don't watch horror movies, no war movies till you're 18, whatever kind of these sort of basic rules, because there's violence in our world that's much more PG rated than that.
And we don't notice it until we have those children we have to take care of. William didn't really answer that because I moved you towards other rules because I know you're in the middle of trying to explore this with your kids. Can you remember any rules we set, William? I don't remember any that we had for you. I would just say sometimes, no, you can't watch that.
Well, I would say growing up, I don't think we watched a whole lot of movies when I or David were really young. But we always had, I guess, you would call them blanket movies, where it's like, it was, it's a good movie, but there are times where it's either too violent or something's too graphic in a sexual nature, where it's like, Mom's seen this before, so it's like, okay, the scene's coming up, you guys got to put the blankets over your head until it's over.
That's good.
So they were never like horribly graphic things, and like, looking back and rewatching some of those movies as an adult, it's kind of like, oh, like that's like almost like silly in many ways, but like as young children, you do have to protect, what people see, and at a certain maturity and a certain age, starting to see more violent things or more graphic things, in a movie type setting is like not the worst thing in the world, especially since if you, look and watch the news, you see all this stuff going on all the time. It's like, you don't want war to be glorified. And so watching a movie like, Saving Private Ryan as a teenager, which is like it has lots of strong language, is very graphic. It's not like, oh, war, some sort of like, like, oh, we're going and fight the bad guys. It's like a very dangerous, horrible, scary thing. And
a true horror movie.
Yeah, like a true horror movie. And thank goodness that you don't have to go on the front line to experience that, but you have a view into someone else's world.
And we watched what I would have called a blanket movie. In fact, there's a scene in a movie William and I and my husband watched last night. It's one of my very favorite recommendations, but it would have to be a blanket movie because there's a singular scene that they stuck in there so they could rate it R. The rest of the whole thing is G, the whole way through. And it's not made by a Christian production company at all, and it's one of the most Christian movies I've ever watched. And it's called Paradise Road. More people are familiar with a similar movie called The War to End All Wars, which is about men in World War II camps. Yeah. This is about women in World War II camps. Okay. And so beautifully shot art piece. It's about art. It's about how women will always bring beauty to any situation they're in. And the Lord is glorified and honored throughout the entire thing without hardly ever referring to him. There are some Christians portrayed in the movie, a missionary in particular. So, but that's the kind of thing that I would call a blanket movie. Another one would be for maybe your older sons and daughters. I don't know if daughters would be so attracted to this, but it's the movie The Book of Eli. Again,
Oh, yeah.
not written by
Yeah.
Christians, and yet one of the most Christian movies you could ever watch. And it's full of horror and violence. So what do you do with that, guys?
Well, Book of Eli is, and I think there may have been some. I don't think it wasn't produced by a Christian company, but I think there was some faith motivated creators in the production.
Well, the
of that. I'd have
guys,
to
the
look it up.
brothers who were interviewed said that they're just interested in all things faith and
All things.
pursue it, but
Mm.
they would say, no, this is not a Christian movie. Go ahead. But yeah, it seems so Christian. You would think that
and
they really thought
I feel
it out.
like I feel like that's some of the things that Washington put in there. Whether or not it's up to
You're talking about
anybody's-
Denzel
anybody's-
Washington, the
anybody
actor.
yeah, you can never know whether somebody who you don't know is a real Christian. But I think he at least had a churched upbringing.
Oh, I would say Denzel Washington was a Christian
Yeah.
by what I've read.
Well, yeah, that's actually a movie I wanted to bring up because it is a post-apocalyptic film about Christianity, about faith. It is not a Christian film about life in the post-apocalypse, and I think that's an important distinction. It could have. This is what I think Christian films ought to look like. Is if you're making a post-apocalyptic story, make a post-apocalyptic movie from a Christian perspective. I saw this thing recently called Christianmingle the movie.
Oh, no.
That's its title. It's an hour and a half commercial for Christianmingle, the dating website, and they were at least onto the right thing. They were at least trying to make a romantic comedy about Christianity rather than a Christian romantic comedy. Thing is, I think there just wasn't a good deal of talent that went into the writing of this script. But I'm trying to think how I can break that apart, because maybe I'm saying it in kind of an academic way.
Well, I know what you're talking about, but the rest of them know what he's trying. I mean,
a lot of Christian films aren't really in any genre, and they try to treat Christian like it's its own genre, and really it's sort of a inspirational character drama, I guess, that you've done about Christian subject matters, and it just kind of ends up ends up not really fitting anywhere or having any structure. Is my impression of a lot of Christian movies.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably the same thing that's happened to Christian music, specifically on the radio. What's popular, it kind of came out of an attempt to appease the masses and present a media that would please not only the Christians but everyone around them, and so they kind of became a caricature of themselves. Where if you listen to a lot of Christian pop music, a lot of it has its own style that is removed from any other pop music because they're locked in what they were doing to try and emulate the world back 10 years ago. And so with Christian movies, they tried to form and make these, inspirational dramas.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I think you'll see the movies are caricatures of Christians, because what happens is, Hollywood tends to characterize Christians, like hardcore Christians, and make, I would say, a meme out of them. And instead of responding to that and saying, well, we can do better and we don't have to, we can ignore that and just make our own movies, they almost respond and address them directly by making a different caricature of what a Christian is. And it's laughable to anyone that's not a Christian. And even sometimes I would say I'd watch a Christian movie and be offended by the representation of the Christians, because they're only attacking straw man arguments, or they're not actually representing reality in any with any depth.
Okay, I think you nailed it right there. That's why perhaps I struggle so much with Christian music that's on the radio and Christian movies, because it does not seem to me to be a good parallel of what my life is and what I understand most people's life to be. Right. Because it seems like it's too prepackaged to say, the movies and the music have a lot of answers and don't leave you with a lot of questions. In my life, I have so many questions that are unanswered that, I read the Bible and God says, wait, trust, have faith. It's going to work out, but I'm not going to show you the answer yet, maybe not even until you die. Are you ever going to know? And the Christian life is one of struggle. I mean, life is difficult, and if we do it right, then it gets much harder. And that's just the way we're supposed to be as humans, okay? But that's how faith and trust grows. And I think that's the problem, is when I watch Christian movies, I don't see a lot of that left unanswered. I see a lot of those neat, tidy packages where here's the conflict, and then here's how it all wraps up nicely, and the protagonist, lives forever with his lovely, princess. You know, and like, here are all the answers. Just do this and life will be fine. And Christian music is the same way, but that's a whole other podcast.
And any book on screenwriting that you pick, I was just going to tell you that that's a bad movie. There's nothing about it being a Christian movie that makes it that way. It's just a bad movie.
I'm picking up you're a big fan of faith-based films, Tobin.
I'm really not.
You know what? Let's talk about that, because you're obviously a movie snob.
Oh yes, and here's the funny conversation I always have when people who are interested in people who love Christian movies, when I'm in the proximity of this the conversation, I'm talking about whatever Christian movie that they're excited about, and they'll say, "Oh, Tobin, have you seen this?" And I'll say, "No, I don't really watch Christian movies," and the response is always, "Oh, right, because you're into film."
So
Let's just swirl that around in your mind for a moment. What does that mean?
it means you're an elitist. It means you're a snob. That's what it means.
So if you come over to my house and I say, "Hey, would you like this some of this $3 wine that I bought at the gas station?" "Oh, wait, no, never mind. You like wine."
Yeah.
Wouldn't the irony hit us a little harder but for some reason when it's film, "Oh, you like film, that's why you don't like Christian films." And we're completely okay with that.
So if I tell you like the top 10 highest grossing faith-based Christian movies of all time, I don't want you to name names because, you know, we might know some people and there might be some people listening to this who are fans of some of these movies. But why don't you tell me a number of how many of those you would consider to be examples of good art? Can we do that?
All right.
I'm just going to rattle off the names. Ben-Hur.
Yes.
Passion of
Wait,
Christ.
which Ben-Hur?
The old one. The old
old
one.
one,
yeah.
okay.
There was only one ever made.
Okay.
The old one. Ben-Hur. Just like there was only one Matrix ever made. That's all we talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
Ben-Hur, Passion of the Christ,
Yep.
Noah, Heaven is for Real, War Room, Exodus, God's Not Dead.
I didn't see Exodus because I don't understand. Is that the one where Christian Bale is Moses?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Why is there a white Moses in the 21st century? I don't understand that.
Are we also going to talk about why they spoke
Dude,
English instead of Hebrew in that as well? Or?
I mean, that's a whole other layer, but you notice I did say Passion of the Christ was good art, and they did speak
Okay, to
languages.
be fair, there are a lot of war movies that have Nazis speaking English too.
Yeah,
so.
and portrayed by white actors, Jeremiah.
Okay, Exodus, God's Not Dead, Miracles from Heaven, Son of God, and The Shack, which is a heartwarming story, but it's terrible theology. So, but let's go through out of those 10, how many would you say are examples of good art?
I've only seen the first two of them.
Ben-Hur and the Passion?
Yeah.
So what you're telling me is you're not qualified to even talk about this.
I read The Shack.
Here's where I was going with that, okay? The top highest grossing movies of all time, non-faith based, Avatar, Titanic, Star Wars, Force Awakens, Avengers,
Wait, are you going to ask me
Infinity
which
War,
ones of them I think are good art?
Jurassic World, Avengers, Furious 7, Vin Diesel, The Rock, right?
Mhm.
Okay? Avengers, Age of Ultron, Black Panther, and Harry Potter, Deathly Hallows. How many of those would you consider to be great art?
Again, I didn't see a lot of them.
So what I'm saying is you're kind of narrow-minded and like you are kind of a snob.
Well, yeah, I like
And
film.
I don't know if that's a great thing.
Here's where I'm coming from with art snobbery. Is film is a language. The language of camera cuts and angles, what's inside the frame, what's outside of the frame, whether the camera is rolling toward an actor or away from an actor. All these things are not just production values that we slap on top of a story. They're the language that's expressing the story. And I like any work of art where the language is used well. Now, people don't always know the grammar of the film language, but I would propose to you that a movie that uses its grammar well, its language of what the camera is doing and what the editing is doing, that's a movie that most people are going to look at and say, that was a good movie that held my attention, or what that really made me feel something. And a bad movie is one that didn't do it well. Whether you consciously realize the way I do, because I think about it all the time, that they really should have dollied backward instead of forward in that shot. You know, that's me having studied it enough that I can articulate it. But a poor use of language, I think, impacts everyone's viewing experience.
So Tobin is the one, for those of you who are listening who don't know this, Tobin and Chris are the two who put together all the brilliant videos that CC puts out. It's great work, but it's far from creating an hour and a half or 2 hour long,
It's true.
cinema experience, okay? Because there's so much that goes into making that. You have to have great script, you have to have great actors, many of them. You have to have great editors, camera people, lighting, sound. There's so many things, a set that has to go into it, that it's very, very difficult to pull one of those things off. And
Oh, yes. But I don't think it's difficult to write a good screenplay. There are a million books on it. And I just don't understand why Christians get a pass making such amateurish mistakes when they sit down to write one.
Right. I want to make sure we're being clear here. Just because we're talking about art films and good films, we're not saying, oh, you should only watch films like Birdman because it's all in one camera take and it's crazy how they did it with the videography. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the screenwriting. We're talking about the direction that the film goes. And I think a lot of the problems that I have with Christian, faith-based films, it's not with their composition as much as it is with the core central message.
Okay, so let's go to that, because you used the word message. Tobin used the word story. I would think that when most people in Hollywood create a movie, and I don't know this, but I would surmise that they start with a good story, and then they move from there. And when Christian filmmakers make something, they start with the message and then build a story around it. Would that be fair?
Well, I don't know. I do know that the Kendrick brothers have explicitly said that that's what they do in their films, and that's Facing the Giants, Courageous, War Room, Fireproof. They've come out and said, and I think I have this quote right: "We make sermons on screen. We don't make movies."
Hmm.
And
So at least they're honest about what
yeah,
they're doing.
yeah, they're
and
honest
then you
about
know
that.
what you're watching.
now, I'm not here to make the argument that you. I don't know. Maybe I am.
So here's my question, because you're not going to say it. Do you think that's a bad thing?
It is not something I'm interested in watching or that I would be interested in making. And I think there's reasons why it's not an effective thing to either bring people into the faith or to build up people who are in the church.
So I think, Tobin, you're attributing a level of intellectualism that the majority of folks don't have. And there's a lot of people who that does speak to their heart and to their minds in a way that it doesn't to you. I'm just saying that one because I actually enjoy those movies, especially if I have a bunch of 8 and 9-year-old girls or boys around with me, because they can really relate to them. So maybe you'll have a different feel about that when they're that age. Versus I wouldn't take my unsaved neighbor who's 54 necessarily to watch one of those if they were a nuclear engineer.
I've just never seen a Christian movie, and I haven't seen a lot of them, and none of the Christian movies I've ever seen, none of them have ever made me feel something deeply or think more deeply about the faith.
Okay, so let me say this: you're how old is your daughter? She's what, 3?
She's 3.
She's 3 years old. Okay. So my perspective has shifted a little bit. I used to be just like you, Tobin. But as my kids have gotten older, I look at things not more in terms of, was this a great piece of art, but rather, was this a good quality block of time that I spent with my family? So, for example, I went to a faith-based film. I'm not going to say which one. And there is something interesting about being in there and looking around at a whole bunch of people who are buzzing because everyone in there is a Christian. Like Leigh said, you're not going to take your unsaved neighbor to this because it's not great art. But it's something that everyone can get in there and reaffirm their beliefs and say, I'm here with a group of people that everyone in this audience believes the same thing I do. And that's pretty cool. That's a validating feeling. So watching this movie with my kids enjoyed it. The oldest one is 11 years old. The youngest one was 3. And they enjoyed it the whole time as a family. Was it a great piece of art? No, but it was quality time as a family? Yeah. So then from there, what we did is we used it to facilitate discussion. You look at everything and you say, all right, what do you reject? What do you receive? And what do you redeem? I mean, it goes for many things in life.
Yes.
Okay. So what out of this movie can we reject? Either, they used a bad word. We don't use that, or this was not real life situation. Okay. What do you receive? We say, okay, in the movie, we saw this. What else can we see? How does this parallel with things we see in our life? And then also, what can we redeem? This was bad, but through the gospel, it can be changed and used for his glory. Okay. And so as a facilitation for discussion, we found those types of movies to be really good for us. But I would absolutely 100% agree with Leigh and Tobin and Chris. that most Christian art is not great art. However, I would say it's just because it's so doggone difficult to make, and it requires resources that most Christians don't
Sometimes
have.
it's the money side of things. We don't spend it where we should.
Well,
That's
again,
it. Mhm.
and this was going to be my segue. It doesn't take a lot of money to make a very effective horror film.
That's true.
The most financially successful film of all time, unless it's been surpassed, was a horror film that I don't think was worthy, but I appreciated the way that it was produced. It was Paranormal Activity. It's entirely shot with the camcorder that one of the characters bought in order to capture ghost activity that was in his home, and then the movie unfolds in the footage that he captured. And I don't think that story was good, by the way. I think it just filled its audience with a spirit of fear. I looked at my buddy and I at the end of it looked at each other and said, "Well, I'm never sleeping again." And but what I enjoy about, one of the things I enjoy about that genre is you don't have to have a lot of money to do a story that talks about good and evil.
No, you just need money for counseling afterward.
The thing is that, as in support of the faith-based ones, Facing the Giant is actually one of the biggest moneymakers of all time. They've spent like $100,000 making it, and they've made $60 million plus on it so far. So ratio-wise, even for a good, but they knew what they were doing, right? They were saying, "No, this is a sermon."
And that's my question to maybe to both of you is, if it's a sermon, why are we seeing it on a film? And that's what I felt during. I stopped that movie halfway through, actually, during a very preachy part, because and it wasn't a preachy part that I would have stopped reading if it was a blog post. It wasn't a preachy part I would have walked out of if it was at a church or at a wedding conference. It wasn't a preachy part that I would have turned off if it had been encapsulated in symbol and done as an artistic piece of film, or even if it was done as a preachy video for 4 minutes on YouTube.
Okay.
Why is dramatic film the medium where we're doing this preachiness?
Well, okay, first of all, the answer is because, what's the saying? In the riches, there are riches in the niches, right? I mean, the Kendrick brothers know exactly what they're doing. They know the audience that they're shooting for. Is your problem that they have a strong message that they're delivering, or is your problem that the message is a faith-based message? Because there are tons of movies out there that preach liberal agendas, that preach, all kinds of things that they're all preaching something, right? Okay, I mean, let's back up for a second. When I look at a movie, I evaluate it based on 4 criteria. I say, what is the message that this movie is trying to communicate? Second is, how well did they communicate this message? Third would be, was this message worth communicating?
Yeah.
And then fourth would be, was there sufficient negative material to detract from me, understanding this message? Yeah. And that is, of course, is subjective. Again, back to Corinthians 8, for everybody, right? But when I look at a movie, if I want to walk away knowing what were they preaching to me, what was the message they're trying to get me to hear? And then did they do a good job of communicating that? And was that worth it? So is your issue with the fact that they're preaching a message or the message that they're preaching?
I think we're equivocating a little bit on the word preach, because I would argue that the majority of Hollywood films don't preach, they demonstrate. They have a message, but they're showing it instead of telling it. I have a big problem with a movie that just tells you the message.
That's really good.
If you're just going to tell me the message, just tell me the message on a blog post.
So
if you have to say it, it's not true.
Right.
Because we should know.
One of the reasons I like Bella so much is because it ends ambiguously, and it's a little bit frustrating.
Yeah.
But that's what the Christian life is a good thing happened, but you're not even 100% sure what the good thing is that happened.
That's good.
Right? And so always just having to be clear does feel maybe too teachy or preachy and more like a Hallmark movie rather than a challenge to your intellectual understanding of Christ. But there are places where I think these sentimental movies have their place. Besides talking with like the littlest of kids, I've seen one case in particular, a soldier who pretty much didn't watch movies, watched one of these kind of movies, and by the end was totally broken down as a person and was ready to start over again. But he was so emotionally damaged that he needed probably to see a lot of sugar and a lot of sweetness and to know it existed. So you probably haven't thought about that way, right?
No, I had not thought about that audience. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, it's...
Chris wants to say something?
Yeah, so I just want to, you're thinking back to what is the message, what is the content? when you're watching faith-based films, and you touched on this a little bit before, when you're bringing your family to them, the fact that you're having a conversation about the film is to me very reassuring. Because when I think of faith-based films, it almost sounds to me like a film that my family can enter into without having to worry about having our worldview wall up. That we can just open up and accept whatever it is we're
Mhm.
about to see because we already agree with these people. And that's intellectually dishonest because you're not going to agree with everything. And sometimes, and many times, I would say there's bad theology in Christian films. And so I think the advantage of watching the other kind of films, at least for me, was that I was cognizant of the fact that I wasn't going to be able to agree with everything in them, and so I was on the lookout for those things as we went along. Whereas with Christian films, oftentimes it felt like it was just like, oh, that's a thing I guess we believe.
I'm so glad you went there because that is my film snobbery isn't restricted to Christian films. I don't. Okay,
Well,
I don't.
that's why I brought up that list of the top
Yeah.
grossest movies.
I don't
That's
watch.
the wrong word, but
I-
whatever.
I don't watch Transformers movies. I don't watch car movies. I don't watch the majority of comedies. Why? Because I like film. There's nothing wrong with people enjoying those kind of movies. In the realm of, but there's this other realm of movies that aren't art called faith-based films. There are faith-based films that are art, but there's this whole category of faith-based films that are not trying to be art. And I feel like when people say, yeah, but you like film, they're really saying you should shut up and agree with this message wholeheartedly. And well, that might be yeah, you can just shut up about the production values and the lack of story in Transformers because there wasn't a message. Whereas a faith-based film is at least based on ideas that are going to shape the way somebody lives their life, and maybe it's actually a poor understanding of Christianity, as I've seen sometimes. And it's dangerous to me to have the attitude of we shouldn't think about the production values and we should just not listen to people who do like production values. It's okay to like something that has poor production values. I'd never take that away from somebody.
Because that doesn't encourage excellence.
I just want to be included. I just want to not be unwelcome in the discussion because one of the things I do is to question the message that the film is about.
This is exactly the reason why, for the last 2 weeks, since Leigh said she wanted to do it on this topic, Tobin has been saying, hey, Jeremiah, let's get together and watch Christian movies. I'm like, first of all, that's a terrible pickup line. I'm already married. But second of all, I am not watching a movie with you at all, any kind of movie, because this is all of these reasons. This is not cool. I don't want to watch a movie where you go through and you pick up the lighting and you pause and you say, did you see the way they faced this way? It was totally, and whatever.
But you think that doesn't impact the message. And in this, I love that you asked those 4 questions. That's a very important tool to have. What were the 4 you had? There were
Say them again for our audience.
I asked, okay, what is the message they're communicating? Do they do a good job of communicating that message? Is it worth communicating?
Yep.
And then the negative stuff. I mean,
Yes.
Was there a ton of stuff that detracted from it? Sex, violence, whatever, language.
So I love those 4 questions. That's a really important graph that people can apply to films. But it is a graph. A film doesn't actually exist in those 4 categories. A film is a single thing. And it's important to realize that the telling of the message can impact the quality of the message. For example, Christianmingle. That sounded really arty and sounded like we're in a film class. Christianmingle, the movie, starts off with this girl. She's in America. She's a nice person. She goes to church sometimes. She's had one too many bad dates, and she sees a commercial for Christianmingle. Okay, she's ready to try something new. And so, as people do in romantic comedies, they tell a little lie to get close to this other attractive person. And then they find they really like each other. And the midpoint of the movie, oh no, the lie is discovered and I can't be with you. And then they go back to their single lives and they find out that they've been transformed by this other person. They can't live without them. And they come back and they've both grown and developed and forgiven each other. And it's a happy ending. That's how romantic comedies work. In Christianmingle, the movie, the lie was that I'm Christian. she lied on the website thing to make her profile. Oh yeah, I'm a Christian, and I'm pick up Christianity for
Scandalous.
Dummies and grip up the Bible for Dummies and sound really good at Bible study. And then it turns out I'm not born again. Oh no. And I think it was a good framework for
Oh no, I'm not born again.
and the boy, the nice Christian boy says, "Oh, I don't know if I can keep being with you when you lied." So I think it had good potential, right? That's a good message. I like that they were doing that. But at the beginning of the movie, here's where the execution, the telling of the message comes into it. Beginning of the movie, based on the clothes that they dressed this character in and the lines they had her say and the way the actress said it, I was immediately confused. Is she the dorky girl who's about to get a dose of real life? Or is she the chic?
And then she takes the glasses off and she's beautiful.
I don't know. Is she the chic young professional who has it all? I can't tell. And then when he comes in, is he a dweeb with a heart of gold, or is he an insufferable chauvinist who needs to change? I can't tell. So I can infer what I think the message probably was, but based on what I'm seeing and hearing on the screen, I don't know what the message is. And that's why the 4 questions are good, but the compartments aren't watertight.
So there's nothing wrong with watching movies like that. The problem is watching them unconsciously and where you don't think about them, right?
Yes.
Okay. More like using any technology. I mean, it's okay. Technology in itself is not bad. Movies are not bad. The problem is when we use them without thinking about them.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, let the record show that it's not just Christianmingle.com, but Tobin will pick on any movie and tear it apart just like this.
I will.
Here's where-
Wait,
I should have said that at the
What are you
beginning.
guys doing at work?
Preparing
Okay.
for our very successful radio show.
That's right. Next question. Hey, here's what the way I look at it, right? When I left this Christian movie that we saw recently, I could bash it, and I got online, and a bunch of people are bashing it. It's easy to trash a lot of these movies from our artistic value. But the bottom line is, when I left and I talked to people at church and I heard other people, in the theater talking as we were leaving, what I saw other believers being encouraged in their faith, and I saw them enjoying 2 hours of unity where they felt built up and affirmed. And I thought, you know what? That's not a terrible thing.
That's a good thing.
So yeah, it's a good thing. So even though it may not, a lot of these faith-based movies may not fit this category of, they're not going to win any great awards for, unless we do like we did with the Dove Awards and create our own little segment of award giving, right?
Yeah.
But they're not going to win any great, movie awards. But that's okay, because maybe they're not meant to do that. Maybe they're just meant to let people know, hey, it's okay. You're not alone. You do have a community of believers who believe the same thing as you do. And that type of market is not a bad thing.
No. So let's go on, because there's so many other kind of movies, and I know we wanted to talk about what people call faith-based movies, but we're kind of falling into the same trap as the music industry you just referred to earlier, in that I think there's a lot of movies no one would call a faith-based movie, but are faith-based movies. So could we maybe go around the room and talk about one that's a Christian movie or has a Christian message that you really like, and explain why it went so well? Tobin's done a good job of sharing some elements that are important in a film. Some ways to maybe distinguish between a good making, just plain with the quality of the film versus not. But we do have children and families that we're going to watch things with, and I'd like to give our audience a few more choices of things that we've enjoyed that we would recommend to them. So do you guys have one top of your head, or you want me to go first?
Oh, you go ahead.
So I'll give a quick list of a few. I really like Bride and Prejudice. It's absolutely against probably everything Tobin just described.
I like Bride.
Bride and
He
Prejudice.
likes Bride and Prejudice. I love movies from Bollywood. And whenever I tend to watch a lot of Indian movies, and I can always tell when they're made in America, because they love interest, if there is one, they always kiss. And Bollywood movies, that's pretty much verboten. You don't do that. You just dance a lot.
Bride
And it's called Bride and
Bride.
Prejudice.
Okay.
And of course, it's on Pride and Prejudice. Another one that's related to classical conversations, which I know a lot of families watch in the middle school years, is Gregory Peck's To Kill a Mockingbird, written
Yeah.
by Harper Lee.
That's good.
I think that's a really great movie. Again, not for the littlest of kids. It's a dark theme, but well told. And then another one, which I just wonder if could ever be made, and it's made today the same way, or where someone would ruin the ending, and that's Roman Holiday with Heparin and Peck, where she is madly in love and has every right to go forth and marry this man, but she has other duties, and she chooses her duties over her own interests. And so those are the kinds of movies that I recommend. Also, Secondhand Lions. Has anybody seen that
Oh,
one?
yeah.
That's a great one.
And your husbands will love Secondhand Lions. And then from anything John Wayne, but in particular anything with John Wayne and the redhead. Oh, I just forgot her name. I can't think what her name is. Well, the Quiet Man's the one I'm thinking
I'm
of,
more
but
of
they
a-
made a few of those together.
And I'm more of an Eastwood fan, so I
Yeah.
can't help you.
Yeah, and I can't watch Eastwood movies because of his moral structure personally. Okay, now that I've said that publicly, 7 Children by 5 Wives. Doesn't ring my bell too much. But and then another one that's really good. That's why I don't like the Lord of the Rings series. I don't want Peter Jackson, who's producing him,
Well,
to
you
get
s-
my money
Wait,
from him.
that's does that really touch on the differences between the Wayne Western and the Eastwood Western?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's a Leigh Bortinism.
all right.
That's all that
Just
is.
thought I'd ask.
And then by the same folks that did Bella, they have another movie called Little Boy, which has a great surprise ending to it and is very family friendly as well as historically inaccurate, but it does touch on some history points. So, and then, John Wayne, back to him. One of the favorites is The Cowboys. I believe the only movie he actually died in where he wasn't the hero. Somebody else is. So that's quite a long list of recommendations. And what about you guys?
All right, going directly off of that, I'm going to combat your argument about not giving Peter Jackson your money by saying that it's impossible to avoid. Well, you could live in a shack in the middle of the woods and never buy anything ever that anyone ever produced, and you'd be safe. But your money will go to places that you don't support. And so, in the case of the Lord of the Rings films, regardless of whether Peter Jackson knew what he was doing, I think he made some of the strongest Christian allegories into film that you could possibly produce in the fiction genre. And I think they still stand as the 3 of the strongest fantasy movies that have ever been produced. So I'm going to recommend Lord of the Rings. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah. I'm sure they're good movies. Just sometimes you make choices besides the quality. You know what? As the kids were growing up, there was always these fads would occur, and every year I would pick one fad to not participate in, not because there was necessarily anything wrong with it, but because I wanted the children to learn you do not have to do everything everybody else does. And so watching those movies on the big screen, William and David were the right age. They were young, wanted to go see them. And I was like, no, we're going to watch other things.
Okay, I've never heard anyone explain it that way, but I can get behind that reasoning a whole lot more than we're not going to do it because he's going to be hurt if he doesn't get my $7. But I like that we're making a stance as a family. Our family is different, and this is an example of how we're different. We have a different stance on things. So I like that because I agree with Chris. Otherwise, what, you never drink Starbucks, you never support anything that ABC and Disney and ESPN, then you can't watch anything, So I got you. But I like that
Sure, of
angle.
course. Yeah.
I like that angle.
I just have to keep throwing that in because people, I don't think a lot of people know Peter Jackson's background unless you are already movie buffs.
So I'll go with a couple of mine. We actually had a discussion earlier, Tobin and Chris and I, about Shawshank Redemption. Which one of us would get to be the one to actually toss this movie out? And I called dibs on that because that should be at the top ranking of any movie buffs list. Is a great movie.
What about your younger children, though? Where's the caveat for there, or is there any?
You mean like would I let them watch?
Yeah, what age would you let your kids watch that?
This is a really interesting discussion because we're very aware that the Bible obviously doesn't talk about movies at all. Jesus never went to the cinema, therefore we should never go to the cinema either. So we have to instead go by the guiding principles that it lays out. And the big idea is garbage in, garbage out. We naturally have a tendency as human beings to exhibit what we take in. And so my wife and I have a lot of these discussions. We're at the turning point now where I'm a big MMA fan. I like UFC. I like a lot of the jiu-jitsu. I like the grappling. And my kids are not at the age where they can responsibly take that in yet, but they're getting to that point. So we were very careful with movies. And they're different, and this all comes back to how your kids are different. My oldest is very emotional, and sometimes he's very sensitive would be a better word. So sometimes things will affect him in movies. Like right now, we're working our way through the Little House series, the whole series, start to finish, A Little House on the Prairie. And there are some of those very adult themes, which are very difficult to process. Even though they're done in a very clean way, they're still very heavy. And so my oldest cannot handle some things that maybe one of the other 2 or 3 children can. So we have to be very, very careful with that. But they're getting to the stage now where, because they're different, we're able to watch some superhero movies. We held them back from those. The Avengers, they haven't seen a lot of the Avengers movies yet. And parents would say, well, what's wrong with you? My kid's 8 years old and he's watched all of those. Yeah, I mean, my family's different. My family's different. So I'm crazy enough to believe that God has a specific, reason and purpose. And he believes, well, we all believe as homeschoolers that the parent, that nobody raise your kids better than the parent does. And so part of that is we believe the Holy Spirit can help instruct you with your parenting. And we believe that with our kids, we have to be very, very careful about that. But right now, we're just entering into that phase where language, we can do minor swear words now. The violence, we can do some violence, but they weren't able to properly, maturely, responsibly handle that a couple years ago. So we have been very, very conservative what we let our kids watch.
So you're being the parent.
I'm being the parent, but I do really look forward to. I think Chris, you talked about, was it you or Tobin talked about Saving Private Ryan? Okay. Oh, that was William. Yeah. I mean, my goodness, I cannot wait when my kids learn more about World War II to sit down and watch that movie with them. Just because when you're surrounded by a 5-point surround system and you have that thing cranked up on the big screen, I mean, and the kids in it, you learn more from watching that about the horrors of war than you do reading any textbook. So,
So Shawshank, Private Ryan.
Yeah, Shawshank, Private Ryan. I'd put Life is Beautiful, Buongiorno Principessa. Yeah, there you go. Roberto Benigni. It's a great, great movie. I thought Dark Knight. I thought, just because if you want to talk about art, I thought Heath Ledger's performance was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Okay.
That was another film that, though it's not a horror film, dared to say that there is such a thing as evil.
You know what?
Which is the Joker.
And we have not let our kids watch that one yet because Heath Ledger was so good.
He's scary.
And so convincing.
These are scary.
Yeah.
And then you wonder what's happening to you when you see a fire engine that he lit on fire, and you get the joke.
Yeah. Yeah. Just everything about it. We can talk a whole episode. Brilliant movie. But no, my kids haven't seen it yet.
Chris, did you go?
I did.
Okay. All right. So I already mentioned Babadook. I'll just wrap that up by saying,
I'm gonna watch it.
Well, the
That sounds
subtitle.
like Australian movies.
Yeah. The subtitle of this movie is "Don't Let It In."
Well, now I'm
which
not.
is something I need to be reminded of as a parent and as a Christian. Don't let the monster into your home or into your heart. And you could let it in by showing a movie as scary as Babadook to your child. That would be letting the monster in.
Awful.
Yeah. But it to me it steels me against the monsters, and it's an uplifting film in that way.
We are so different. The IMDb says this is about a widowed mother plagued by the violent death of her husband, battles with her son's fear of a monster lurking in the house, but soon discovers a sinister presence all around her. ... I want nothing to do with that.
You need to see this with me.
Okay. And then we'll watch Christianmingle.
But I'll give to kind of see, because that'll help you go to sleep after. But my other recommendations, I've said it before. I love He-Man. I don't think this was intentional, but it is a fabulously Christian assemblage of symbols. He-Man, his name is Prince Adam. Every morning when he wakes up and he's not He-Man yet, he's Prince Adam, and it's his job to defend Eternia from Skeletor, who is a death face on a strong, muscly body. And the only way to defeat Skeletor is by drawing his magic sword and calling on the power of Grayskull, which, if you haven't seen the show, is a skull-shaped mountain that's got a castle on it. And I just think the symbolism is, I don't know how it even happened.
A king on a cat on a skull.
Mm-hmm. And
Right, that's what Golgotha means, is the skull.
Yeah. And according to tradition, Golgotha was Adam's burial place. Interestingly enough. So week after week, he defeats Skeletor through things like courage and virtue and sacrifice and friendship, and those things are treated as having a real impact on the world. And I really like that. Not just that courage motivates him to do things that impact the world, but courage itself is a real thing.
Yeah, that's good.
So I love that, and of course his twin sister has her own show, She-Ra. And the filmmaker I want to recommend is Hayao Miyazaki, who is a Japanese animator.
Chris is nodding like he has any idea what Tobin just said.
You know, Chris is an otaku. You don't know.
You don't know what they know, you know?
I don't know you.
You see what I did there? Because you probably don't know that word either. And I just said it like, yeah. And you don't know that it offends him. There were layers. There were layers to that. You don't know.
I'm happy to be here.
Hayao Miyazaki is he's the inspiration for a lot of the people at Pixar because he's a generation older than they are. And what he has done is to take a lot of Western fairy tales and kind of retell them. And he has such a deep insight into children and loneliness and repentance and these kind of things. And I love, there's a film called Porco Rosso that is his Frog Prince, but it's about the man is turned into a pig, a porco, and instead of a frog. And we did one that I think is so Christian, and it has a very strong female character. It's called Nausicaa, Princess Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind. And she is probably the best cartoon princess that I've ever seen. But that's a rough movie that's full of cruelty and despotism. It's not really a G-rated film, but it's going to be one of the first like violent things I let my child see because there are things in it that are painful of people's inhumanity that should be painful to us. And Nausicaa inherits this world and does her job as a member of the royalty.
I wonder what it was like when you and your wife went on your first date or went to your first movies. Is she into this stuff too?
I mean, she listens to me talk about it.
Okay, there it was.
Dina's kind.
Can I just say, though, about the horror movie genre, that humans have always been totally infatuated with the idea of scaring one another and themselves. That's why we told campfire stories, and that's why when you're growing up as a kid, you'd sit in a dark room with your friend and like tell scary stories that you come up on the spot, even if they're not very good. That's why all the Grimm's fairy tales are horrible and have all these scary things in them, because there's something to be said about knowing that you're safe and seeing the evil and then knowing it gets resolved. And then there's this euphoria afterwards where it's over.
And in that, it kind of has that in common with fairy tales in general.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments? Been about an hour and a half.
I mean, I could keep recommending Miyazaki movies if you wanted.
Oh,
Spirited Away.
Can we do that, please?
All right, guys. Well, thanks for being here tonight. Thanks to William for being our special guest and telling more about his family life. It just gets broadcast across the world here. Thanks to Chris. Thanks to Tobin. Thanks to Jeremiah. And thanks to your families that gave you up for this evening. And we'll see you next month. Go to classicalconversations.com. A lot of the books that we sell have been made into great movies. And so you can go ahead and pre-read the books, then discuss them with your children. And then when they're a little bit older, maybe watch the movie and see it from a different angle. So thank you.